Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome back to Creative Insights. The point of Creative Insights is it's an opportunity for our students to hear directly from industry professionals and learn about life in film, TV and music. As we said before, we're focusing on film and TV, and the afternoon sessions are going to be mostly about the music industry. I would like to thank my T-level students who are doing all the technical setup and basically running the show today. Everything good about it is down to them, and everything bad about it is my fault. Just a little reminder before we start, there's going to be exclusive podcast sessions today in room A3. At 2 o'clock, we've got Universal Music Group coming in. At 2:30, we have Digital Orchard. And later in the afternoon, we have freelancers from the world of sound for film and sound for TV and O2 Academy for live sound and technical management. So let's dive right in. I have me right now, I have Dee, and Dee is the Director of D-LUX Rentals, but you do other things as well.
Yeah.
Which we shall go into in a fairly short space of time. And I've got Jay, and Jay, I have you down as a freelance director cinematographer, but again, you also wear other hats.
I do indeed.
Every so often. So I think I'm going to start off maybe by asking you to talk a little bit about that, about what your, maybe I can turn to you both and ask what are your other hats? What do you do? These short and fairly mundane sounding job titles conceal a wealth of things.
Well, as mentioned, I'm a cinematographer, DOP, which is Director of Photography, for those who don't know. The other hats that I wear mainly is first AC, which is a first camera assistant, focus puller, who's mainly in charge of the technical, the technical sides of the camera department, basically.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to go into that a little bit further at some point, but I think let's turn to Dee. So you own and run D-LUX Rentals.
Precisely.
But again, you do some other D-LUX Rentals. It sounds like you just sit in an office renting lights. But I think there's a bit more than that.
Yeah, I'm mainly a gaffer, and that goes with I think the previous talk that you guys were actually talking, and then someone mentioned about a gaffer, and nobody knew what it was. Basically, it's the light chief technician. So it's the person behind all the lights and rigging lights and all that. And depending on the scale of a job, I can also work as a spark, which is below the gaffer, but obviously I'm working with someone more experienced than me, who's been in the industry for longer than I have, and I'm just basically supporting and carrying the heavy load, basically, of equipment from A to B.
Okay, so there are these roles of gaffer. I'm going to gaffer and spark, and there's grip. What's grip?
Well, it's basically rigging.
Yeah.
Whenever you see, for example, a scene with lots of scaffolding around a car,
yeah.
Or trusses, all of that is from the grip department. They're ensuring that something is safe. So, for example, they would assess the studio and they would say, right, you have a limit of X amount of kilograms that you can rig there. And then they obviously have to sign off. So that's the rigging part of it, the building
and there's different
supports.
Different roles as well in the UK and the US in terms of the workflow and how that works. But,
yeah.
I mean, mostly it's about rigging lights, rigging cameras, everything that's weight heavy that needs to be safe.
Yeah, the whatever I am saying here is obviously related to the British industry. The American industry is slightly different in terms of the nomenclature of what people do. Yeah. But in the UK, within the grip department, there's also a few different roles that they're still chiefs, but they're basically very specific. So you have the key grip, which is basically the main person in the grip department. Then you have a dolly grip, who is the person in charge of him or her and their team to lay tracks and push the dolly and talk directly to the DP how they want the speed of the dolly, and it's a complex department.
Yeah.
Their union is really tight, so you can't just join in and call yourself a grip. You have to be a trainee for quite a few years, so that's a longer journey than I'd say most.
Specifically because you need qualifications because you're dealing with people that could get injured because you're dealing with the weight basically. So you need some qualifications in terms of this is a safety check, right? The production has insurance on your qualifications and they know that they're sorted.
Yeah. Okay. So it's quite it's a physical but technical kind of role.
Very physical.
and safety critical kind of role as well.
Absolutely.
I'm going to kind of dig a little bit more into this because, I mean, you kind of in some sense work together because obviously cameras and lighting are quite closely related.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask a little bit about the nature of the various job roles that you do, and maybe you can discuss a little bit about how those job roles work together as well, because we mentioned it with the previous guests in that there's a lot of moving parts, and by moving parts we quite often mean people.
Yes.
Doing a lot of different things, and it all has to kind of link together in a coherent way quite quickly. And under pressure a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So maybe you can give us some insights into sort of what those jobs and roles are, especially for the benefit of students who might not be aware of all of them and what they do.
I mean, I'm just going to start, but essentially, because sometimes people feel that their job is less important than someone else's, right? So it's less important than the director or the DP, or is essentially, imagine like a football club,
Yep.
right? There's a reason for 11 to be there, and if you have 10 men, you're not doing, something will be missing. That's essentially it. In the film industry, we all have the same goal, which is finishing that project, that film, and literally everybody is incredibly important. It doesn't matter if you're a runner or if you're the director. So
I think it's always surprising to see the amount of people that are on set, especially if you're a newcomer. But the truth of it is if you remove a lot of those people out of it, then there's some safety issues that can come in hand, because then maybe you'll be overworked, maybe you'll have longer days, maybe there's something that wasn't checked out properly, there's maybe something that could fall, or there's all those safety things that can happen if you're not enough people actually.
Yeah. So the longer day thing is quite interesting because we talk a lot about work patterns in the media industry and how you kind of have to be prepared to be in at X in the morning and things like that. But in safety critical roles, you have to, it's like being a lorry driver on a tachograph or something. You have to kind of have a time limit on how long you can do things. Is that right?
I don't know about, yeah, on paper potentially, yes.
Yeah.
How it plays out is slightly different. I mean, in terms of grip stuff, if you have some really heavy loads that you're doing, you'll have a day separate from the shooting day to make sure everything is safe before anyone goes on set. So you'll have a whole day where you go, if it's, let's say, studio stuff, they'll be rigging a whole set, some bars at the top so you can detach lights and all sorts of other bits. And on that, normally they'll have what you call maybe a standard day would be 8 hours, but it can go a bit higher. Yeah. So there's not specifically any restrictions onto how long like a lorry driver would have. But yeah, I think it doesn't really apply. It's more like it can go up to 12, but in fact the grip, as it's quite physical, but also there's a lot of times where you're sort of standing whilst a lot of stuff is happening and you're not doing much. So there's a bit of rest period between the things that you're doing, basically.
Does that sort of apply in lighting as well?
well, yeah, because a lot of times we're not using stands to rig a light. We're using truss, or we're using some other solution, either from the location or from a studio. So yeah, well, as Jay said, what we normally have, I have a friend, a gaffer, who was spark rigging a next Marvel film that I don't know when they're going to start filming, but because it's so complex, the amount of cables, for example, and we're not talking about the 13 amp cable extensions. We're talking about thick cables, like copper, heavy, and the whole day running over trusses and over a whole studio. And as you probably know already, not small studios. They are massive, right? You're running like multi-million pound films. So the behind the scenes of it is humongous. The whole production is that. Hence the amount of people that is needed to make sure that everything is safe, is get done in a timely manner. So yeah, lighting and grip work very, very closely.
Yeah.
Because essentially, like as I said earlier, if you have a car scene and the grip is making sure that there is a place for the camera to be, we're using the same structures for a light fixture, for example. So the camera is, let's say, on the bonnet, and then we have on the side, we have a light rigged as well while someone is driving, or normally would be on a low loader. But yeah, we all need each other, essentially. And grip is incredibly important for, I think, both departments, really, camera and
absolutely.
lighting.
I mean, grips, on lower productions, you'll have maybe less things because you don't have some big heavy equipment, and maybe you'll go just with a tripod and stuff like that. And oftentimes you'll have maybe the second AC, the clapper loader, and the trainee in the camera department who are moving the tripods around and moving the cameras just to make sure. But most of the time you'll have a grip that are doing that. So it comes in quite hand in hand in terms of working with a grip for sure.
So I'm going to kind of come in a little bit on these because you've both done some quite varied roles. You've directed an award-winning short film, which I'll kind of come back to in a minute, I think. But you've worked as director of cinematography. You've worked as assistant camera. And I have here that you have done editing as well.
I have, yes.
Yeah.
Early days.
And you've been a gaffer and a DOP and a camera operator and a jib operator, and you run a rental business and stuff like that. So I'm going to ask you to maybe, you're probably really good people to give a bit of an insight to the students on what's it like to work in those roles. So if I'm a freelance director cinematographer, I guess I'm not just getting up in the morning and going, aha, I'm going to direct a film today.
A lot of people think that.
Yeah.
Well,
if it was like that, it would be great. It would be great. But no, I think you have to be very proactive in terms of, as you have to either create your own projects or find your own projects, or network and get in contact with some production companies that want to that have some projects going on, and you're basically pitching your ideas, your ways of doing it. So if you have experience on stuff that you've filmed, then you can showcase that and kind of be a candidate for a potential project that a production company's doing. Otherwise, you can do some mood boards and get some inspiration from other films and images online, and get an idea of a project that you wish to do for either a specific brand, or you get in contact with some directors, you write your own scripts. It's very proactive. You have to sort of be moving out there.
And I imagine quite organised as well. I mean, if you're deciding to put a project together,
yes,
you can't waste 5 days sort of dithering about.
Well, I mean, it's always good to, it's a very collaborative industry, so if you have some people around that can help you to organise stuff, it helps you to stay more on the creative side of things. But I think if you do have some organisational skills, it's definitely very helpful. It can help you get ahead of the game. Yeah, for sure.
So sort of I mean, you're going to have to do a lot of phone calls or a lot of emails or a lot of...
It's self-discipline as well.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, if I want to get something ready, I can't just wait for the project to happen. I'm going to wake up in the morning, I'll make sure that I can sit for a couple of hours and put some ideas on a piece of paper, or do some research, gather some stuff, some ideas.
Yeah. So you almost have to kind of timetable your own day.
Kind of.
In quite a sort of...
It helps because it's such a creative space to be in. I always kind of see the industry as a bit ethereal. It's like everything's in the cloud. It's a bit hard to pinpoint and get a hand on. So having your own schedule or having your own structure is very helpful.
Yeah, so sort of structuring your day around that.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the same, I mean, with your various freelance hats on, Dee, is that the same for you?
I guess it depends at which stage of my career. If it's now, it's just like, obviously you have to be incredibly disciplined with your stuff. But also what changed now is that now I tend to employ people, right? Freelancers. So I have to be not only organized for myself, but also clients as well as the professionals that are providing their service to us. So it's, there are some days that, there's no glory about the cinema industry, because you're just sending emails, just reaching out to potential clients. As Jay said, checking some references is not only because I'm not a director that I'm not gonna, it's important for me to just go and watch other films, understand how they lit like a scene, for example. But yeah, if you break it down, most of it as a rental place, to many people will sound a bit boring, but that's what it takes for us to be in the right projects. We have to do, it's basically like the base, you have to have a really good base to then start scaling up, and only well, not quite recent, but from last year, we after 3.5 years that we've been open, we got our first Netflix production, and then since then we've done, I think, 5 or 6. In February, an Amazon project. So, there are some. You essentially just have to be very disciplined, because the projects are not going to just happen. I mean, obviously, once you get to a stage in your career, someone's going to be like, oh, I need an AC. Oh, yeah, I know, Jay. But until you get there, you have to do a lot of different, you basically have to wear lots of different hats.
Yeah.
So this is quite an interesting thing from our students' point of view, because obviously they'll be starting. So I think quite interesting from their point of view is what's it, if you're starting in your careers, or if you're starting working for you as a freelancer, or if you're starting working with you or for you as a director with those hats on. And you could probably cast your mind back to your early days in your career when you were doing this for other people. I'm going to come back to this question, what's the day like? So with your other hats on, not your director hat, I get up in the morning. What do I do? What does my day feel like if I'm working, say, as a freelance lighting person?
Well, I guess again, do you have? If it's a day that we actually have the project and we going on set.
Let's go from that.
Yeah. Because the other one I think is going to just be too long.
Answering emails.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's important for people, for younger professionals to, as Jay mentioned earlier, to join, rental houses, understand how the hierarchy works. All of that observing is very important. That's what I've done a lot in the beginning. When I was a trainee, I was just observing who would respond to who, and then just to understand the workflow. Now, in a day that we've got a project, so my day generally starts very early, around 4:30, 4 in the morning. Just going to the office, making sure that I'm obviously loading the van with all the equipment necessary. Again, depending on the scale of the project, I'll have a Spark with me there, but most of the time, I'm doing on my own. So loading a van, driving to the place, and then, but obviously you've discussed the production already before, because the project is a long thing, right? You can't just show up and this is what you have to do. So the pre-production is very important, but on the production day, that's essentially it. So we load the van with the necessary kit that was asked generally by a DP. And then once you get to set, to everyone, please always be on time. Head of departments love that. If you're late, it's definitely not a great start. And then again, it really depends on what exactly we're shooting, right? If it's something that is, if it's a music video, it tends to be a bit more relaxed. If it's narrative, it's probably going to be incredibly busy. Did we have the chance to go before, as Jay said earlier, to pre-light, pre-rig everything, or do we have to start from the beginning? Because that would dictate how many people you need in your team, to assess if I need 1 spark, 2 sparks, or maybe 5 sparks. And then throughout the days is a constant, again, it really depends on the scope of each job. But generally speaking, it's moving a setup from here to, from the bedroom to the kitchen, and from the kitchen to the outside, and outside we're going to the car, just moving, and always being, attentive to what your superior on set, basically anticipating or trying to anticipate as much as possible of what's going to be next. So asking questions, making sure that you're following, if there is a script, following the script, following obviously your call sheet. Be prepared for a lot of fun, but a lot of hard work. Yeah. That's essentially what it is.
I'm going to come to you on the same thing with your AC hat on.
Yes.
Because I hear these terms AC, assistant camera, and focus puller.
Yes.
I'm not entirely sure what the focus puller does. Assistant camera, I've got this idea of somebody kind of like running around putting tripods in the right place or something, but I'm guessing that there's more to it than that.
There is. So you'll have, if we break it down into 3 positions, or let's say 4, you'll have the trainee who comes in, you'll have the second AC, which is the clapper loader, and the first AC, who's the focus puller and in charge of the technical side of the camera, and then you have the camera operator. So the differences in those, you'll have the camera operator who's right next to the cinematographer when we do have one. Sometimes the cinematographer's actually operating. So they're kind of the ear onto what's happening and where they're going to be and what's the shot, and so they have less sort of responsibilities in terms of moving stuff and making sure that everything's functional. They're more on the creative side of things, but they're kind of overseeing. So, like Dee said, there's a bit of a pyramid in terms of you'll have the cinematographer, the camera operator, and then you have the focus puller, the first AC, who is in charge of all the technical side of things. So they're kind of the right-hand man of the cinematographer who makes sure that all the tools that they need to acquire, to do the shots is everything they have. So they'll be like, okay, this is the type of shot that we're going to do. We'll have a crane to do this, that the grip department comes in, but to do that we need a long-range wireless to actually have the image that reaches for the focus hand unit, which is wireless. And so you're controlling the focus on the lens. You're making sure that all the technical things are happening in camera, in conjunction with a DIT, which is a digital image technician. So they'll make sure that in the digital world, things are exposed properly, all the information is correct, and there's not any flaws happening in the softwares of the camera. And they'll often dial the settings on the camera. But the first assistant will be sort of keeping an eye out and changing those settings to the requirement of the cinematographer. And overseeing the how the day runs in terms of, okay, we're going to need to move to the next scene. So I've got, let's say with me through the day, I've got a set of sides, which is a small script. And following the schedule on the call sheet, I know what scene we're going to move on to after we do, let's say after lunch, or we do a scene and then we move into the next one. So sort of just giving some directions to my assistant, which would be the second, onto, right, next we're going to have to move to, let's say, the other room because we're on location, which means they'll have to sort out the mag liner, push all the batteries over there, and all the things that are happening behind, which, if you have a really good second AC, they preemptively do. They're looking at the schedule as well. They're already kind of moving ahead so that when we're there, everything's ready to go, and the producers will love that. But yeah, other than taking all the notes, so they'll be making sure that every single shot, there's the notes of what the settings were in the camera, what we've changed, if we put anything in front of the lens, what T-stop we were at, all of those things that are happening behind. And then you'll have the trainee, which officially are there just to sort of give a hand and learn from all the other assistants. Oftentimes are running coffees, doing battery runs, making sure that everything's charged, taking the notes as well from the loader to make sure that they're logged. Before in the film days, you'd have a film log sheet where all the information was there. And oftentimes, because the loader will be quite busy on set, they'll sort of give those notes that they have in a little book for the trainee to fill in and use as practice, basically. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the breakdown of the different roles in the camera side of things.
So it's quite, I mean, what I'm hearing as well is there's an awful lot of preparatory work has to go into all of these things to make sure that it runs properly on the day.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, we tend to sort of put it under a sort of pre-production hat, I think, but a lot of it is just making sure that things will run smoothly.
Yes.
And I imagine that there's kind of days even before the thing starts.
So yeah, sometimes it depends on how the schedule is, and
yeah.
if you're in a studio, if you're on location, you know, depending on what you're looking ahead, then you might do some preparation the day before, or you'll come in early and do some preparation a couple of hours before, depending on what's needed.
And I want to come back to a point that Dee made a bit earlier about observation, about how watching what other people are doing and figuring out how workflows work, and also understanding how equipment works is I assume, very important.
Very, very
I'm
important.
guessing if I rock up and I'm prepared at all, have no idea of the workflow and don't know one end of a camera from another, that's not going to go well.
Not necessarily. I mean, if you're a trainee, that's acceptable because you're learning, and you know, being inquisitive and being curious is probably the most important trait that you can have, because you're there to learn. If you're asking questions, obviously you have to be careful when to ask the questions, because if it's right in the middle of filming and someone's really busy, you don't go up to them and ask them a question, because then, you know, it'll distract them, maybe it'll break the shot, and all that, and it's high level stress. So Yeah, on some sort of moments of downtime to ask some questions and be very curious, and also do a bit of research online if you can, or even go for a coffee with an assistant that you know, and ask them to run through a camera or different processes of some technical equipment to learn on the spot there. Then yeah, it's very important.
So this stuff about talking to people, which I hear a lot from people who come in from the industry, the thing about being able to talk to people and being able to be curious.
Yes.
And take a bit of initiative in asking things at the right time, obviously, is a...
Yeah. It's very important to be proactive, and sort of, I mean, you probably experienced the same on your side as well, where I think networking is a key aspect of the industry, and it's oftentimes how you get your work, how you get hired, by networking, by getting to know new people, by getting in contact with some people that are already in the industry, and oftentimes that's how you get a foot in the door.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to another one of Dee's points from earlier about watching films, watching films or watching TV, and seeing how things are like and seeing how things are shot. I guess in your case,
Yeah.
Is that something you spend a lot? I assume it's something you spend quite a lot of time doing, but don't log it as work hours?
I don't log it as work hours, but yes, I couldn't tell you the amount of hours I've spent watching series and films just in the past 5 years. It's thousands. Well, thankfully, lockdown kind of allowed me to dive deep into that, and I had a lot of time to watch a lot of stuff, but I'm always trying to keep ahead and watch the new stuff that's coming out, and watch some indie stuff that's not necessarily on the big platforms, and do a bit of research. So there's a lot of, every time I watch a movie, I'm always keeping an eye out for some inspiration and something that I find is interesting or that was a bit unusual or original, to see, why did they do that? Where did it come from? That's interesting. I didn't see how they lit this shot. How, there's different techniques. There's thousands of ways of doing the same thing. So, yeah.
I'm going to ask both of you as well, is that kind of a conscious process? You're looking to see how is that lit, how is that shot, or how much of it is just kind of like what you might call cultural immersion, just kind of looking at a lot of things to get a general feel for how films work, or how...
I think it's very conscious to me. I'm always trying to keep an eye out as to how things are lit. If I'm watching a film, I'll try and either replicate it, or I'll do some research to see if they have some BTS stuff. Or even just on my day-to-day, where I'm going to catch the train in the morning and the sun is falling on a building in a really beautiful way, and just trying to understand the angles and what's actually happening in all these different environments, what lights are being showed onto what surface, and if they're shown through a surface, if they're bounced off something. You probably relate to that a lot, I don't know.
I think most cinematographers and gaffers tend to do that throughout their days. You're walking around and you're just, again, observing something, observing how... Because lighting isn't a cinema thing, right? The sun, the cinema was just 100 or something years ago. The sun has always been there. Yeah. So understanding how light works, it's essential for what we do. Obviously, not with the admin side and all that, but when we actually crafting something like a film, a lot of DPs expect gaffers to come up with some ideas to how we can do something creatively. And sometimes creatively, what I mean by creative is not the actual result of it, because the result normally tends to be dictated by the DP. Yeah. But how you get there, the DP is not going to, come to me and say, yeah, I want you to rig this way, because that's my job. That's my job to understand how something is rigged safely.
They might request like a specific light. They'll be like,
yes,
I want
specific
source 4 up there,
sure.
and stuff like that. But it's like, depending on you'll know more than I do, because I don't necessarily work in lighting, but you'll have different approaches from different cinematographers, where they'll either be very specific. They're like, I want that specific light over there at this temperature, or you'll have someone that comes over and says, right, I want this part of the scene to be quite soft, and can we have a difference of like 2 stops on the other side?
Yeah, I have a little theory, and I think that it depends where the DP came from. And I don't mean in terms of countries, I mean in terms of like how did the DP climb the ladder. So if the DP climbed through camera department, generally speaking, and obviously this is not a rule, but generally speaking, in my experience, they're going to in a way expect more from the gaffer to come up with. They're not saying I want an ARRI XYZ here, rig like, no, they're just going to say I want some soft light, warm soft light, right? And it's to do with the gaffer to decide what kind of diffusion they're going to use, what kind of lamp they're going to use, so on and so forth. Whereas if the DP came, like, you know, the DP was a spark and was a gaffer and then became a DP, then they're going to be very specific about what they want. Even the type of cuts that they're doing with a light, what kind of flags. There are some DPs that are really hands-on, so you just essentially set up the light there and they go finessing. You know, like for example, I have a light here. I'm just gonna be with a flag. If I was a DP, I would be with a flag here just to cut maybe like one light from his eye, from his right eye. You know, a lot of DPs do that, but I think it depends where they came from, the way that they climbed the ladder. That's how I see it.
So is one of those easier to work with than the other? I mean, as someone who does lighting, is it easier to work with somebody who keeps saying, no, do it this way? Or is it easier to work with somebody who goes, I want some warm light?
I think to be honest, I'm a very fortunate person. I think that like my journey, like I still can't believe that I'm doing what I'm doing, right? Yeah. So I think adaptability is an important thing to consider. So you always, you know, try to understand, because everyone is going to be different, right? So we tend to work with, like for example, with same DPs, but both Jay and myself. But everyone is going to be different. So I think that it's better for as a gaffer, it's better for me to understand the DP style and adapt to it. Yeah. Some of them will be, I want this here, this, that, blah, blah, blah. And some of them will be the opposite. And I'm happy either way. The only thing that I you know, really stand up for myself and then is if there is safety involved. Because I might have more experience understanding how something is rigged safely, and the DP might say, can we have something there? And I would just go and assess, you know, the rigging and explain to the DP why we can't or we can. So, well, if we can, we can, and the DP is going to be happy. But yeah, that's essentially how I approach my days. Because essentially I am under the DP, right? DP, at least in the UK, that's how it works. And I'm just going to be listening to the requests, and then I'll just relay the message to my team, to the Sparks, because sometimes it's not only, excuse me, it's not only one light and one diffusion there. It's a whole lot of equipment just to make sure that scene is lit properly. So while I'm doing, let's say, the key light here, one of my Sparks is just making sure that window is blacked out, and the other Spark is already with the haze machine. So it's a whole process. So I think adapting to whoever is above you, and I'm always trying to anticipate. So if I notice that DP is talking to the director or to someone else, to our department or whatever, for the next scene, even though I'm not necessarily involved in that conversation, if I can, obviously if I'm allowed to, I'm nearby, just listening, because then again I can relay already. I don't necessarily have to tell my Sparks, just go and set up that over there, but just have on standby 3 of those stands, a couple of lights, because this industry, it can be very, very expensive, right? It's not because we're not doing multi-million-pound project, but let's say that you are an executive producer and you're investing on our film, right? The fact that you're not putting, 10 million doesn't mean that it's not expensive for you still. So we need to make sure that efficiency is always there. I tend to be health and safety first. That goes without saying. I'm not gonna put my team in danger or anybody else. So health and safety is always first. But then we need to, like communication. Communication is really important. So, trying to anticipate, don't try not to wait. Again, that's why observing is key. Because try not to wait to be told what to do, right? Obviously trainees are there, as Jay said, to learn. But if you see a cable just running across as a hazard, if it's in a doorway or whatever, yeah, just tape it. Oh, but it's not my job. But just tape it. That's not the case. I don't want anybody on set to get hurt. I don't care if they're from lighting department or art department or camera department. My job as a whole, the way that I see, part of it is looking after my colleagues. Yeah. So that's essentially what I the way that I approach like a day on set.
Okay. I'm wondering how we've got a few minutes left. I'm wondering if you could maybe. Okay, I'm told we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if we have time, if you could maybe tell me a couple of, I'm going to be asking this through the day. Maybe don't have to give any names because there's legal things might be the case, but maybe if you have any anecdotes you could tell me, if you have any stories you could tell me about particular things, maybe talk me through a thing that happened on set or a shoot that happened. It doesn't have to be something that went wrong, it could be something that went amazingly well.
I've got a couple actually. There was one on a commercial. What was it, last year at some point where we were filming. It was great fun. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's 3 cameras. There's a green screen. The music's there. There's some clients in the background that are looking at the project happening. And then, as we're doing a shot, the DOT comes back to me and he says, "I think something's wrong here because it looks a bit fuzzy." And effectively the lens, it was a zoom lens, the back element of it was not calibrated properly from the rental house. Well, I don't want to blame it on the rental house. It might have been knocked somehow between when it was delivered and when we were filming, but effectively it just rendered the shot no good. We had to reshoot it again. And there's a lot of pressure there because everyone just turns to you where you have to sort it on the go. While the project still has to happen. We're halfway through the day, and if we don't get this sorted, they've just basically flushed some money down the toilet, right? So it's very, very fortunate that we could just move to another shot without that camera being used just before lunch, and it actually gave me the time through lunch. I just took a bit of a short break myself to go and calibrate the lens. And yeah, it's a bit of a surprise. It catches you off guard, but sometimes you have those moments that happen and you have to sort of figure it out as the day's going by.
So there's a kind of problem-solving element as well. You get
Absolutely.
told something's a bit fuzzy,
Yeah.
and you have to presumably go through a kind of process of like, is it this, is it this, is it this?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, it's the lens.
Yeah.
And then you can go, right, now I know how, now that's the case, I know what to do to fix it.
Yeah. Fortunately, as I'm a focus puller, it's kind of my place to see what's wrong with it. So, through a little process of seeing, we had a few different lenses. So, thinking it could be the sensor, it could be maybe there's a shim that's throwing off the lens itself. So, trying on a different lens to see which was sharp on the other camera. Is it a problem in the camera? So, doing that rendered that it was fine. The other lens was working. We could move on to actually doing the lens and sorted all of that. But yeah, effectively troubleshooting is probably one of the main skills that we kind of have on set, and I think I quite enjoy it personally.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to ask you maybe to contrast that, because that's sort of been your focus puller second AC job.
Yeah.
But I said I'd come back to this. But you also have made as a director,
Yes.
director cinematographer, an award-winning short film. So how's that? I mean, maybe something about that to illustrate how that's different to being an AC.
Let's see.
Tell me a bit about the film.
Yeah, well, it was quite an interesting one, because basically there was a collective that I was part of, and we were doing maybe a short film a month and something like that. And the whole process behind it was there was a bunch of members that would submit some scripts, and it was voted by the members to see which one would be done. And the script that was voted for that month, I saw come up, and I thought it was interesting in the sense that it was very challenging, because there was it was kind of a comedy. There was some VFX that was involved. There was an animal that was involved. So there's a lot of what I would say the things that you want to avoid.
Never worked with animals or VFX technicians, right?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's a hurdle throughout the whole thing. So I looked at it and I thought, right, I don't know who has the experience to pull this off. So let me just give it a go. I'll try, just for fun, as a challenge to see if I can pull it off, if I can do something with this little project. And it was an interesting one, because I thought, my process was, this is going to be quite complicated, so I'm just going to prepare as much as I can. So I broke down the script, I did some storyboards just to make sure I had every shot that we could it already pre-planned, especially as on the day we always run out of time. So I was like, okay, like that I can know exactly what we need and I can cut the fluff out if we need to. And it was interesting because I had a couple of, for the casting, I had a few actors that I had in mind that had sent me a showreel and sent me a little clip of like an extract of the script, basically. And it's funny because who I had in mind to do the lead was actually the opposite. It turned out to be the opposite. So there was a villain and a superhero in the movie. And who I thought originally was going to be the superhero ended up being the villain, and who I thought was going to be the villain ended up being the superhero. But it was a really fun process because as it's a superhero, there's a lot of kind of design behind it, and we had to design the superhero suit and have a bit of a play with that. And yeah, to my surprise, it came back with a few awards that I wasn't expecting, which is great. It's a good little experience.
Thank you very much. And Dee, we have a couple of minutes left. I think we have quite a short time now. But I'm just going to ask you again.
Usually happens to lighting.
I know, right? I'm so sorry. Do you have an illustrative anecdote that you could maybe?
Well, I mean, obviously there is lighting specifically, because once we set up lights, we're kind of available on set for people who generally need help, right?
Yeah.
That's the way that I see. On bigger sets, that doesn't work that way, that, you know, everyone is doing just specifically what they need to do. But on smaller sets, you know, jack of all trades, and it's been my reality for my entire life, really. But I had, on a not so great side of things, on my first feature, we were very limited in terms of resources, specifically people. So I had my best boy who had an idea of what he was doing, and who was basically a spark, and I had some trainees, but they had no experience. And in one of the setups, we were just setting up a stand with a boom and a light. The first AD, assistant director, asked the cast to start coming to set, and I approached her and I said, look, the set is not safe yet. Are we okay to just remove the actors for a minute, and then once it's safe, I'll make sure that I'll let you know. One of the actors was standing right under where we were setting up. She left. 5 minutes later, the whole setup collapsed. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't deadly. Obviously, it can be, but it would definitely hurt her. But you know, you have we're always trying to obviously avoid this type of scenarios. So on that side, that's one that I remember. And on the good side, I think, to be honest, I'm very biased to say anything about lighting. I love what I do. So it's, for me, I try to every day learn something new, anytime that I'm on set. As I don't know if many of the students here know, but I worked briefly with Attila in TV. And yes, there's some, I'd say, great stories, but I tend to just enjoy my days, really, because it tends to be very, very stressful. There's a lot of pressure. You know, people are going to ask you to finish something yesterday. It's very, pressure is always there. Make sure that you enjoy the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm told I only have a few seconds left, so this has come to a halt. This is the perfect timing, I think.